Okay, good afternoon to you all. I welcome you all to this virtual panel discussion. And we are honored with the presence of distinguished panelists, Dr. Chatterjee, Shri Saxena, Shri Mehta. This is a topic which our president had in his mind, and he immediately requested Mr. Rakesh Nath to organize. So now I request Mr. Rakesh Nath to please proceed with the webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. I had circulated a note on this subject. The frequency profile of the regional grids prior to introduction of UI mechanism in 2002 was extremely poor, in fact, very volatile. And after the UI mechanism was introduced, so the objective of the UI mechanism was to maintain grid discipline through a commercial mechanism. The UI charges were linked to the frequency. And in 2009, the CRC introduced the UI regulations, where UI rates was 0 at 50.3 and then rising steadily to about 7 rupees 35 paise, 49.2 and below. The regulations had inbuilt mechanism and incentives to users to provide grid support during high and low frequency, and disincentives for deviations from schedule, which were detrimental to the grid security. The regulations were amended twice, mainly to modify the UI rates and imposing a limit on drawal by the DROIs, and the frequency limits were tightened from time to time. And the UI mechanism brought a dramatic improvement in the frequency regime of the regional grids. In the year 2014, CRC notified DSM Regulations with the objective of maintaining the grid discipline and grid security through control mechanism for settlement of deviations from schedule by users. The deviation charges were linked to the grid frequency, 0 at 50.05 and more than 8 rupees at 49.7 hertz and below. And there was a provision for additional deviation charge for access over the specified volume limits. The DSM regulations were amended from time to time. In fact, there were 5 amendments. In the 4th amendment, the volume limits was increased for the renewable energy rich states. And the deviation charges were linked to the price discovered in the day-ahead market in the power exchange, along with the grid frequency in a time block. In the 5th amendment, which was notified in 2018, a provision for sign change rule was introduced that with every 7th block, the sign of deviation was to be reversed or maintained within a tolerance limit of plus minus 20 megawatt. And failures to do so attracted some additional penalty. The frequency regime of the grid improved considerably after that. And the spectrum of the frequency spectrum of the national grid from 2018-19 to 21-22 reveals that the frequency was maintained between 49.9 to 50.05 for more than 75% of the total time, and only for about 5 to 7% of the time, it was below 49.9 hertz. The new DSM regulations have been introduced and made effective from 5th of December 2022, with the objective to ensure through a commercial mechanism that the users do not deviate from and adhere to their schedules of drawal and injection of electricity in the interest of grid security. The deviation charges have been linked to have been dealing to the frequency. Any deviation is required to be managed by NLDC or RLDC through ancillary services, and the users have to pay the deviation charges, which is linked to the ancillary service charges rate, which is the total ancillary charges expenses divided by the total ancillary services used. That is the average charges to be determined for the entire country. And for 1 year, however, it will be maximum of either the ancillary services charge of all regions or ACP of the day ahead market or real time market, whichever is the highest. Now, the consequences of the new regulations have been that the users have been subjected to very high DSM charges, sometimes as high as rupees 40 per kWh, when the gas turbines were pressed into ancillary services. Some generating companies, in the normal course of providing mandatory primary control, have also been subject to the penalties, because the tolerance allowed, the operating range allowed to the generating company in the new regulations is only 2%. Whereas under the IEGC, they are supposed to provide primary regulation up to 5 to 10%, 5% for thermal and 10% for hydro machines. And on the other hand, the frequency of the grid deteriorated. Now, CRC has done some course correction. In the first order on 26 December, they put a ceiling on the deviation charge rate to rupees 12. And after that, they again reviewed it. Only yesterday, the new order has come, where CRC has given some directions under exercising their power to relax and remove difficulties. So the changes that have been made are the charges for deviation have been dealing to the ancillary services charges, and it will only be now linked to the higher of the ACP of discovered price in the market for that block in the day-ahead market or the real-time market. The operating band for sellers has been increased from 2% to 10%. The wind generators operating band has been increased from 10% to 15%. And there are some additional clauses which have been reduced for conditions when frequency goes below 49.95 hertz or above 50.05 hertz to incentivize the users to assist in maintaining grid frequency. An expert committee will also be constituted to go into the details of inadequacy of primary and secondary response and give their recommendations. Now, today we have very eminent panel and also the participants in this discussions. I am looking forward for a very useful deliberation on the issues and coming out with the suggestions which will help us to improve the deviation settlement mechanism and grid security as a whole. May I have the panelist, Dr. Sushant Chatterjee, then Mr. S.C. Saxena, ED of NRLDC, and then Mr. B.B. Mehta, Director Orissa SLDC, and ex-Chief Engineer of Gujarat State Commission. So shall we begin with Mr. Sushant Chatterjee? Dr. Chatterjee, there is no dispute that grid security, resource adequacy, and DSM have become very important with the increase in the variable power component and with future plans of decarbonization. Could you please explain briefly? So, Shant, in the meantime, can you just tell us briefly the main objective to revisit the DSM regulations and what problems CRC wanted to address and the reasoning behind delinking the deviation charges to frequency?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon and thank you, sir. Thanks for inviting me to this panel discussion. It's such a hot topic and generally on a subject on which CRC has been working and engaging in refinements. Generally, we don't participate, but sir, it's your request. So right at the outset, sir, I would like to put a disclaimer that any view that I express may be taken as my personal view in the individual capacity as a thinker in the sector and not necessarily the views of CRC. So, sir, let me briefly address the broad issue around the unscheduled interchange or the DSM, what has been the thinking in the minds of the Commission. and what developments have happened over the period, and what is it that possibly we can work further on it as we go along. Sir, I mean, at least to start with, let me put it like this, that resistance to change is a common human tendency, because we generally don't want to come out of our comfort zone. So whatever changes that the Commission has brought about through the new DSM Regulations 2022 have in a way cajoled many of the stakeholders out of their comfort zone, and hence the objections, the issues. But this is not to say that the change that has been made is absolute and perfect 100%, and that it does not need change. And given that the Commission realizes that it's an evolving process, it's been working in terms of refinement, and as you rightly highlighted, the Commission came up with a first set of orders, followed by the order yesterday late evening, bringing about certain changes. But then, as has been highlighted in those orders, they are more in the nature of an interim measure. Right approach is what needs to be explored further, and we propose to constitute a high-level expert committee to go into the details. But to give full concept of unscheduled interchange, or subsequently the DSM, the deviation settlement mechanism, was conceived at a time when we were in a shortage scenario, and this mechanism helped the generation or resources which we could not have harnessed through an organized contract mode. So in a way, it induced the market participants to respond looking at the frequency and driven by the incentives and disincentives that the frequency mechanism brought forth. So some of the generation resources, some of the supply, which we could not have brought on line, they were brought online through the unscheduled interchange mechanism, because they saw incentive in over-injecting, under-injecting, overdrawing, underdrawing, and they acted. And this did serve a human service at that time, but so many developments have happened over the period since the introduction of the availability-based tariff or the unscheduled interchange way back in 2002. And the Commission's basic objective is to make the stakeholders realize that time has come when you adjust yourself to these new realities instead of depending only on the old system for meeting your energy requirement. And I emphasize, sir, the UI mechanism or the DSM mechanism, in a way, encouraged at its inception or by its whole design, encouraged people to meet their energy requirements by relying on the grid. That was one thing which the Commission sent a very strong message against. They said the Commission over the period, I mean, especially since 2009, the message was that unscheduled interchange or DSM cannot be used as a trading mechanism for meeting your energy requirements. And the Commission also noted that while it served its own purpose, it also, in a way, crippled. The point that I was making is that one finding that the Commission had way back in, after 2009 and down to the current state, is that over-dependence on the grid for meeting the energy requirements, this trend that was witnessed, that also in a way dented the capabilities and the propensity of many of the load-serving entities in terms of doing long-term or medium-term power procurement. They felt that whatever contract that they have, beyond the contract that they have already entered into, they can lean on the grid and meet their energy requirement on a day-to-day basis. That was something which was not desirable, and the country also paid a price for over dependence on grid by way of a grid failure in 2012, and subsequent to that, several changes were made in the DSM mechanism, and volume limits, especially the volume limits, were brought in. But another important development that took place only in 2020, in the midst of the COVID pandemic, was the introduction of the real-time market. So prior to June 2020, when we introduced the RTM, the general trend was that the load-serving entities would schedule on a on a day-ahead basis, and post that, whatever is their energy imbalances, I emphasize energy imbalance, whatever energy imbalance that they have vis-a-vis the day-ahead scheduling that they have done, they would meet through the unscheduled interchange. Nowhere in the world, and especially in power system as vast as India, this is something which is desirable or thinkable. So we brought in this concept of the real-time market. The basic message again there was to drive the stakeholders away from unscheduled interchange to meet their real-time energy imbalances to an organized market called the real-time market. So real-time market was a hour-ahead market. Real-time was hour-ahead market. The basic message again there was that after you have done a day-ahead schedule, 24 hours is too long a period for you, either as a generator or as a buyer, to project, to anticipate with 100% accuracy in terms of your generation profile and your load within your state. There would definitely be some variation closer to real time, but closer to real time, when there is a variation in your demand and generation, do you lean on the grid to meet these imbalances, or do you go to an organized market and meet your energy imbalances? We felt we had a look at the international experiences, and we made strong efforts. It took also more than 3 years for us to bring in this concept of real-time market. When we were bringing there also, sir, there was a big hue and cry. We had tough time convincing the stakeholders in the need for creation of a real-time market, which is nothing but an organized market platform where the same set of players who possibly were trying to correct their imbalances vis-a-vis the day-ahead scheduling through unscheduled interchange to...
Yeah, so Shant, I'll just interrupt you here. You see, presently for dispatch, scheduling and dispatch, the area is a state. Control area is a state. Now, in the present arrangement, what is being done is that the RLDC or NLDC will correct the regional imbalances. But there is no mechanism, neither there is adequate liquidity of reserves, nor there is any mechanism for correcting the deviation in the intrastate system. So in this scenario, how will this system, centralized system, succeed when there is inadequate reserve adequacy and no mechanism within the states to control their deviations and area control error?
Yeah, sir, you are right.
So do you think that only market bringing this market mechanism will bring the necessary changes and develop the reserves, or something more is required to be done in this direction?
Yeah, sir, I agree with you, because, sir, we brought in the concept of regional control because as per the statute, we are empowered to talk in terms of or provide regulatory framework only at the regional level. So when the whole concept of regional control and state control, we have made provisions for state control area and need for state control in the IEGs, but in the ancillary services regulations, when we were creating this concept, this legal issue came up, and it was felt that in our regulations at CERC, we could only talk about the regional control area and the management of the imbalances at the region level, but that the need for balancing the load and generation within the state is something which was reiterated by the Commission in its regulation and also in the SOR, and through the forum of regulators, efforts are being made to bring about similar or corresponding provision in the state. But merely because they don't have an ancillary services framework or in line with the kind of framework that CRC has put at the inter-regional level, at the interstate or regional level, does not mean that you use grid to grid as a revolving reserves for you, because that is the basic message that we are wanting to send. Because see, the RE-rich states have been asking for higher bandwidth free zone in terms of their deviation, because they say that they are not able to manage. So from 200 it has become to 250 and now it is 300 megahertz. That means a basic message which is coming from the states is that you expand this band and then you let people use grid as a revolving reserve. This way, I mean, you cannot run the system like this. This is one message which has to be communicated. Only you need to create reserves, you need to have resource adequacy. And so this is one aspect which was reiterated post the grid failure in 2012. Whatever the Commission has been talking about through its various regulations today is not really new. I mean, this was articulated by the report given the time. I mean, I can read it out, but it's there in the statement of reasons of the CRC regulations 2022, where this point that the regulations of CRC which allow deviations from the schedule as long as operating parameters are within the prescribed standards, they need a revisit. And that this whole business of frequency linked UI needs to be revisited. And there was a separate chapter in that expert committee, that inquiry committee report, which talked about the need for frequency control through generation reserves and ancillary reserves.
Okay. Mr. Shahi, would you like to say something before we proceed to the next panelist?
I'm listening to, I am there connected, but I would come at the end. Let's see what we listen to the people. Okay.
Okay. So can I come to the next panelist, Mr. Saxena?
Yes.
Could you please unmute Mr. Saxena?
Yeah.
So, Mr. Saxena, what are the reasons for the deteriorating frequency regime after the implementation of DSM regulation? Do you think that the directions given by CRC by its two orders will have the salutary effect, or something more is required to be done?
Whether Chatterjee completed his address, but it was in between.
We'll go to Mr. Chatterjee later. We'll go later.
Right. Thank you, sir. First of all, I must thank you all for inviting me to be part of this panel discussion among such an august and learned gathering. I'm humbled and would very humbly submit my views here. First of all, must appreciate the amount of effort and the regulatory directions that have been provided by the Honorable Central Commission, and in bringing this to a state where we are today, where we have excellent market mechanisms, excellent participation by the utilities and all entities here, and things are progressing in a direction where we would like them to progress. First of all, right. And the second part is that this recent development of delinking the DSM mechanism from the frequency, to me, it seems like demonetization in the power sector, sir. It is a sudden and a drastic change that has happened to our system. Whether we were ready or not for this, or it is a futuristic measure, remains to be seen. Deviation settlement is actually a very, very important pillar amongst the 4 pillars, essential pillars of market design. And the DSM price is actually the real price that is actually happening in the system. All other prices are discovered ahead and are forward prices only. Real delivery is happening because of this price. So this price must be worked out in a very, very careful and a meticulous manner. The design is very intricate and very complicated, and it should not only be given merit based on the commercial signals. What I would like to say, delinking frequency with the deviation price is like delinking security from the deviation mechanism. Practical purposes, it will then be removed from security of the system, and the participants would get no signal, no inkling about what is happening to the security of the system, while they simply aim at satisfying their commercial requirements or their whatever power procurement requirements are there. Here, I would like to also mention that we often look towards the West about what they are doing and how they are. Apparently, they do not have a frequency linkage, but it is not so. ENTSOE, mature markets like Europe, US, all have a frequency linkage component. It is well documented in the NERC Joint Inadvertent Interchange Task Force report. In the ENTSOE system, we have 20 millihertz to 100 millihertz band, wherein €2 per megawatt hour frequency linked rate is applicable. We have the BAL standards by NERC, which also incorporate a frequency component. So it is not as if the frequency component can be delinked from this. Other aspects that Dr. Chatterjee mentioned, I am in complete agreement with them that this should not become a trading tool for the market participants. However, here I would like to say that though we began in a manner where this was being used as a trading tool, but since 2018 onwards, post the linkage to the market and all, things have improved by and large to a great extent. Here I must also acknowledge the extensive work done by the committee constituted under Mr. A.S. Bakshi, the then member CRC. And the contours, the design was deliberated very well in detail by that committee. So there are many design parameters which really need to be considered while designing this. What are the reference prices that we need to be taken into account for DSM? What is the size of the markets that are to be linked? We have granularity, periodicity, frequency linkage, geography, spatial factor has to be taken into place. Then we have to have the time factor, and of course volume limits and cap rates also play a very important role. The other important aspect that is also coming out is that the deviation should be truly inadvertent. They should not be advertent deviations, which is what results into usage as a market. Once we say truly inadvertent deviation, elsewhere in the world, there is a requirement to bring ACE to 0 frequently. And this is where, to some extent, the sign change requirement also played some role. Use and abuse of systems are there, of course. People take it to their advantage. That is one part. There is another aspect which says that adequacy may be a prerequisite for delinking frequency. Here, I would also like to say that adequacy, even if we achieve adequacy, keeping a frequency component incorporates security in the system, and people respond to that. There were many difficulties that we also faced while we were implementing these regulations. For instance, the sense of direction is lost, whether I'm helping the system, whether I'm working against the system. Then the ability to dispatch ancillary services itself, because of the wild frequency fluctuations, how to take the consistent decision as to dispatch, which are the time blocks where we really need to dispatch up signal and down signal. With so many fluctuations happening, it is really becoming difficult for the desk level operator to take the correct decision. And in the end, what happens if the frequency is not stabilized? The poor operator gets questioned all the time. So again, this is not a desirable thing. That the design needs to factor on all these aspects. Coming to the dispatch of reserves, or for instance, maintenance of reserves. We've always said that, in fact, Rakesh Nath sir has also mentioned that the state level reserves are also required to be called into service. Rightly so, sir. I believe there are two mechanisms to harness the reserves that are available in the states. One, have an explicit regulation by the respective state regulatory commissions to provide the mechanisms for assessment, procurement, dispatch, and settlement for reserves. The other aspect, in the absence of such mechanism, what was happening was through our DSM mechanism, the frequency linked DSM mechanism. The frequency linkage was a competing price through which a decision to dispatch the state level reserve was being taken, was happening in the system. People were dispatching their hydro reserves or whatever small reserves, generation reserve they had, to be able to not only manage the deviation, but also in the process help the system in terms of secure operations. So this is what we also call as the passive control system incorporated into the deviation settlement mechanism. We have active control through active dispatch of reserves, but this passive component also is a trigger point for dispatch of reserves. So we must not lose sight of that. And that is why we have been always emphasizing that a frequency component, whether we achieve adequacy or we do not, is an extremely important component. Let me also, before I stop, I would also like to mention there are countries like South Africa who came and learned from us our frequency linked DSM pricing and went back and implemented it. In our country itself, many states are implementing SAMAS provisions and are implementing frequency linked deviation regulations, and we need to keep that also in mind while we are going forward. I would stop here, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. So what you are saying is in the earlier regulations, we had a mechanism for carrot and stick. So carrot if you help the grid, and stick if you go against the interest of the grid. Right. But in the present regulations, we have only stick, and that we don't have adequate results also right. to correct the deviations. Now let me come to Mr. Mehta. Mr. Mehta, one of the major issues, Mr. Mehta, are you there?
Yes, sir. Sir. Yes, sir.
One of the major issues is inadequate resource adequacy planning at the DISCOM level or at the state level. Resource planning at the state level with respect to the peak. Presently, we are doing the resource planning based on the peak demand and the energy requirement, maybe monthly energy requirement. But in today's scenario, when we are increasing the RE component, that is not adequate. We have to plan for 8760 hours adequacy at the state level. So how do you think the resource adequacy culture has to be enforced?
Yes, sir. Sir, I'm audible.
Yeah.
So first of all, let me thank that I'm getting an opportunity to put forward the views in front of very eminent personalities of the power sector, who's who of the country, sir. If I make some mistake, kindly pardon me. Sir, let me come to the basic things about why deviation takes place. This is very important, sir. Sir, it has a natural phenomenon is only one, that is unpredictable variation in the demand and renewable generation. This is only which is not in our hand. Rest of the thing, let us see. Non-availability of a scientific model-based demand forecast solution. Sir, we have a kitty of more than 10,000 crore plus in power system development fund. Did we invest it to provide a scientific-based demand forecast solution to the poor states who are facing the DSM, who are paying this? Say, RLDC analysis is not settling any financial settlement of the deviation. It is only the state who is doing it. They are not equipped with any ancillary services. They are not equipped with even primary control. Let me honestly admit, sir. So certain administrative things, if it is done, I think we don't have to relook and revise our DSM formula rules, etc. It doesn't stop here, sir. We have a large presence of the fluctuating load, specifically in certain states like Jharkhand, Odisha, and it leads to a wide deviation. Do we have something to mitigate with respect to that? Also, we have not thought of the balancing and storage resources. Sir, we have a without spell planning, 500 GW for the renewable. Do we have 50 GW of balancing or storage planning, and which is compulsory put forth and allocated to the state to come forward and to reduce my DSM? Probably the answer is no. And it's also, sir, we don't have primary control. We don't have automatic generation control. The state does not equip with the ancillary services. And let me tell one thing, sir, something which if I do the word wrong, if I violate the grid discipline, so under frequency delay, we have been pleading to revise the setting at 49.6 and above. It is being set at 49.4. So no tool at the disposal of the poor system operator to manage the grid. Now let us come to, sir, what is another thing which impacts this? Sir, the renewable energy DSM mechanism, which has been framework, which is
I'm asking you, how do you plan to develop that in the states?
Sir,
how do you, how?
I come to
Okay.
that also. Sir, because these are certain things affects the deviation and which need to be addressed first. If it is done, then things will be more. Because its natural phenomenon is very limited. Administrative phenomena or administrative regulation rules are much more, which is to be corrected to come forward with a narrow band of the deviation or with a less deviation. That is what I feel, sir. So if we see the percentage error formula for the green power, and if we see the percentage error formula for the brown or a conventional power, it's different. So the net effect on the boundary for which the deviation is counted is same. So how can I drive a car with a two different speedometers, sir? Even, sir, there is a zero penalty for 8 to 12% deviation by the renewable projects. It leads to the dreaming only, sir. It leads to the dreaming only. It prompts the developer to forecast more, and it doesn't take place. So poor grid operator has to fetch for the power at 12 o'clock, midnight, the day starts, and the renewable doesn't take shape. And one surprising, sir, RE schedule I can revise by 6 time blocks. The developer will revise the schedule by 6 time blocks. But SLDC cannot revise the schedule before 7 or 8 time blocks. So there is a gap between 1.5 hour gap, sir, which allows me to deviate only. I have no other tool with me.
Yeah, that is why I'm only asking you. These are the nitty-gritties. But how do you develop the balancing resources in the state? What is required to be done?
Sir, that I'm coming to that, sir.
And state regulatory commission level.
Sir, first of all, sir, for the state like Odisha or states doesn't have any surplus margin available at all the 96 block in the day. What is important is that, sir, we cannot keep the more machine on bar and pay the high variable cost for the partial loading of the machine also. So we need to take a corrective action. And the 50% online reserve, this provision is not being followed by almost any state, sir. So these are certain limitations. The state doesn't say if today something goes wrong, I don't have any ancillary power with me. So state will not able to operate it. So we have to manage with load shedding and load restriction only. So there is a limited surplus generation. So resource adequacy is very important thing. But before we come to that, I may be wrong, sir, I feel that. But we need to correct some of administrative things that will help us to decide further about the electrical power, sir. Sir, I will also come to one simple change which has taken place in the 5th December 2022 regulation, that the sign change violation has been removed. Sir, it allows somebody to continue the draining for a number of blocks together, hours together. Actually, we need to continue with the sign chain violation penalty for that. Even the detachment of that Saxena sir already said, the detachment of the frequency from the DSM rate proportionately, that has resulted into wide fluctuation in the frequency. And today what happens, sir, that DSM rate is known to the person who operates the grid. Previously, it was depends on the frequency only. It was a corrective or it was a decision making parameter to determine the DSM rate for the current block and the next block, which was not known to anybody. Today, I know what is the next 4 block, my RTM rate. I also know what is the next 4 block or up to 96 block, what is my dam rate. And I know what will be my impact of the DSM rate. So I will be able to avail the benefits that of. So that leads to a mis-grid operation than the technical requirement of the grid, sir. So these are certain things. And to come to a suggestive portion of that, we need to narrow down the frequency band to the extent possible. Maybe 49.9 to 50.05, A penalty for underdraw at the high frequency, we need to impose upon. We need to check the DSM rate for the over-ingestion by the generator to be limited to their variable cost only. We should not allow them. And the sign change, if it is underdraw to overdraw in case of frequency of high, that we have to continue. We don't say that sign change to be done very blindly. It was a wrong practice. It was a probably wrong thing against the grid operation, which was in force till 5th December. But what is proposed after the analysis, and if we keep the grid balancing or the security of the grid in mind, overdraw to underdraw in case of the frequency is low, we need to have that. And as far as, sir, your question that about maintaining the resource adequacy, sir, the states is to be equipped with the empowerment to keep the ancillary services, margin in the running machine on bar. Today, whatever, sir, the SLDCs are driven by the holding company or the distribution company for which the power is being scheduled. So we only becomes the only spectacular, or we have to simply see what is being scheduled by them and we have to drive the things. So these are certain limited. So a lot of change are required at the state level regulations, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have very eminent audience with us. I think Mr. Soni is there. I think Mr. Soni, can we have some intervention from Mr. Soni?
Sir. Yeah, thank you, sir. Sir, could we hear others, sir? I would try to understand first that what exactly is the, or you want me to say now?
Yeah, a few things. Any suggestions that you want to give?
Sir, all the issues which all the three panelists have made are valid, sir. We need good load forecasting. We need resource adequacy. We need reserves. We need tertiary control, secondary control, primary. Everything is needed, sir. And very rightly said by Mr. Mehta, a lot of work needs to be done at the state level, which is completely missing at present. So the frequency is not only controlled by RLDC and LDC, but also by SLDC. That also has been mentioned. Now, coming to the point, sir, I fully agree that we need all these things. There is no doubt about it. And we are working in this direction. CRC has been giving directions and things are happening. My humble suggestion is, why remove something which has worked? It will die its natural death. If frequency remains constant, automatically the frequency linkage will become, dormant. So, we need to transition is difficult to handle, sir. So my suggestion would be, sir, that work on all these fronts mentioned by all the great panelists and done by CRC. But before removing, first set right other things and then you don't have to remove it. The last point I will make is that there is no need to becoming very defensive or apologetic about our frequency linked imbalance pricing. As Mr. Saxena also mentioned, the whole world does like that. That's a control system's basic theory, negative feedback loop. There has to be a droop. There has to be time constants. Everything has to be incorporated. It's a highly complex engineering problem with the tuning of governors and tuning of DSM. So what was tuned over the period of time, suddenly you disturb the parameters, that will not work, sir. And it's a large country, federated system. So, sir, I would stop here. The point is, have all these things and step by step go with this, sir. The last is CRC or the authorities, whoever are there, if there are violations, they have to be booked. There has to be fear of law, sir. The area control error going left and right, there is absolutely not a single utility ever penalized. In US, they are penalized many, many times. So sir, I mean, all these things have to be taken into action. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so can we have the questions from the audience?
May I say, Rakesh?
Ji.
I feel when I was in CRC and when we changed these regulations on the UI rates, etc., frequency linked, the frequency did show a very improved result in that regard. And I agree that the resource adequacy, etc., has to be there, and the state regulatory commissions may also work in this regard to make the system more perfect. But if the penalties could have been increased, the frequency could have been maintained very well. And I feel there was no need to take a clue from the international practices. If somewhere, as Chatterjee said, that we need not depend on frequency. that was not a right step in my opinion. Since the frequency band, the Sony would confirm, had improved a lot when we changed the band very narrow. Therefore, we should reconsider whether the frequency-based DSM could be reintroduced with heavy penalties. I mean, we should not be considerate. If someone violates, let there be a heavy penalty on that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ram. Mr. YK Sehgal, I think you sent a request for raising a question. Mr. Sehgal of Green Co, are you there? From the panel?
Tista Urja would like to submit something.
Swati.
Yes.
Bhargava, yeah, from Tista Urja. Yes, please.
Yes, sir. This order, which has come just yesterday, it has given us a great relief. However, sir, some point still remains. That is when the frequency is higher. So there is a penalty for 50.032, 50.05, 75%. Then even after beyond 50.05 also there is a penalty. So when we do the primary response through our governor and the load is reduced, generation is reduced, then also we will get penalized. Earlier, beyond 50.05, there was no penalty if we do under injection.
So after the new regulations came, you were subjected to penalty for your primary regulation, mandatory primary regulation duty. Huh?
Yes,
and
sir.
you intervene manually to reduce the governor action.
Yes, to avoid under injection, because otherwise we will get penalty.
Okay.
We could hear Ghanshyam Prasad.
Yeah. The Ghanshyam?
Sir.
Please.
Sir, I think I had been in a good listening mode, sir, because there could be some kind of a conflict. So I'll not comment much on this because I am also heading a committee on DSM, and I had a patient hearing from all these
doctors.
So I'll not at this moment. I'll not say, but I have heard the three panelists, and I go by the views that resource adequacy definitely is required to be in place before we take stringent measures. Forecasting definitely is another area which also emerged during my discussion with all the stakeholders. And I have also taken up this matter with IMD and all the associations, the solar associations and the wind association, and trying to see that the process of forecasting becomes more streamlined. Had also discussion with hydro developers as well, and luckily the concern of the hydro developers have been addressed by the yesterday's regulations, revised regulations. The concern still not. I think I go with the Tista Urja, what he has commented, and other hydro developers has also commented earlier, is because the primary response definitely is not being taken care, and which earlier used to come from the generators. So there is a disincentive still continues to be there in the present construct of the fact. Third thing and fourth thing that I would like to also say is definitely we need to take care of the technical matters and not too much mingle with the commercial issues. So that will be my final take on this.
Okay. Any other questions from the panelists? Otherwise, I'll pose the questions. Please, any questions or suggestions from the panelists, from the audience?
Sir, I'm the YK Sehgal of this side, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Sehgal.
See, apart from all the experts, in regard to the resource adequacy and the forecast, all those things are in any case required. And what Ghanshyam Prasad ji rightly saying, the focus has to be parallel. Like we are certainly penalizing and incentivizing to maintain the system parameters, but at the same time, the creating of the infrastructure in terms of resource adequacy, a good forecast, better forecast, and those are a very important aspect. I will just like to supplement that when we talk about resource adequacy, certainly the government is also working towards, as we are adding the 500 gigawatt RE capacity addition, the more encouragement has to come for hybrid and the hybrid with the storage, so that any the variability, intermittency, and all deviation which are occurred because of the RE sources can be addressed. Like if we have more focus and more 500 gigawatt introduce such type of customized supply, then also the resource adequacy will be handled in a better way.
So Sagal, the present trend is that the distribution company wants the supplier to give them round the clock power to match their load demand rather than themselves planning for their resource adequacy.
You're right, sir. Nowadays, different
idea than leaving it to the supplier.
Yeah, that's why now more bids are coming for the customized power, right? Rather than the old time when there was a peak power and off peak commitment. Now everybody looking customized power, and suppliers are tuning themselves, particularly with the hybrid and with the storage, particularly the off-stream pump storage projects which are coming out there, along with the hybridization of the RE. So we are in position to give a customized power. If we certainly a lot of encouragement is coming from the government, and certainly this will be a very good step forward towards the resource adequacy. So like it will go big way.
Panelists, any other questions from the participants to the panelists?
Sir, I'm KVS Baba, sir. Can I make a point?
Yeah. Please, sure.
Sir, I also endorse all the views what all have expressed. But how long the states will expect somebody else will do their job, sir? See, the point is that everyone wants somebody. Let somebody does my job. There stands. It becomes very impractical to do center to do everything, or somebody else to do everything. So we are going towards decentralization of everything once the renewables are there. So even the actions also have to be taken in that manner only. So dependence on the entire others will be a difficult. I agree with Mehta Saab telling that we don't have any systems and processes in the state, but that is the ultimate view. I mean, effort that we have to do, that every state have to make their own processes and regulations. So I just want to supplement, sir.
Okay. Any other question from the participants for the panelists, or suggestions to improve the DSM regulations?
Yes, I was to give a suggestion. I mean, just the basic thing about keeping the frequency within limits. The earlier thing about incentive disincentive was the right thing to do. So if somebody to prevent people depending on the UI or the DSM, there is already a thing where they have put limits on the overdraw in terms of tie line flows. That's one. The second thing is that this sort of system would work if the frequency stays around 50 throughout. Then that would be quite okay. But if there is a chance of it deviating, going up and down, then there has to be a carrot and stick policy to keep the frequency in place. And even if it's 50, even if the frequency is maintained 50, but there could be times where there's sudden shortage of power and things like that, and you don't have enough resource, where the frequency may fluctuate. So this incentive and disincentive should continue, according to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Batra. So, any other questions? I see some hand raised. Mr. Rawat, could you please bring in the... Any other questions from the panelists?
There is no sign of hand.
One more point I would like to say. Mr. Chatterjee could not justify adequately that there was a need for a change in the system. Just
so, Mr. Chatterjee, what is the way forward in your view? Because definitely we were not prepared for this drastic change in DSM regulations. So what do you think is the way forward?
No, sir. I mean, in terms of justification, sir, I started and possibly ended with the same message that you cannot depend on grid and for meeting your energy requirement. That's one clear message which the Commission has been sending, and also wanted to reiterate through this new regulatory mechanism of DSM Regulations 2022. And that's one point that.
One interruption, Chatterjee. What is your objection if the frequency is maintained all right? If the grid has some plus and minus, etc.
Yeah.
Our objective is grid frequency must be maintained. That's it. I mean, if somebody draws from the grid or supplies to the grid, why should be our concern?
Sir, so frequency regulation by
this thing that still I'm not very clear that what was the need to revisit. I'm still not very.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making is that frequency regulations are by design is also considered elsewhere in the world as well. It is considered as an ancillary service. So the basic point that we are wanting to make is that you cannot allow frequency regulation to be managed on a decentralized basis by the grid connected area. Frequency regulation by design is an ancillary service which has to be managed centrally by the system operator. There can be a support from the grid connected entities. That's a separate issue. How we bring that is a separate issue. But then frequency regulation, we have different types of ancillary services, and frequency regulation is considered as one of the ancillary services which is managed by the central by the system operator, any power system that you see. So that's one point. And secondly, the point also that was made, like you are talking about on the one hand you are saying that deviation must be inadvertent, but at the same time you are trying to create a frequency linked incentive and disincentive mechanism to for the market participants to deviate advertently. It is no longer an inadvertent deviation, because you are wanting people to respond looking at the frequency, and so it no longer. So these are two contradictory things in our view, at least in my view. That on the one hand you are saying that the deviation has to be inadvertent, and on the other hand you are wanting to create a frequency linked incentive and disincentive or commercial mechanism for people to react. Yes, possibly given the current scenario, the frequency control cannot be done by the system operator on its own, and the Commission has taken steps in this direction. But the point, another important point that I would like to highlight here is that at least through these interventions, some of the things which were under the carpet have come to the fore. That we have been talking only about resource adequacy, planning reserve margin, need for reserves at the state level. But at least these incidents post delinking have highlighted all these issues all the more. Said not that frequency fluctuations and excursions have not happened in the past. It's been a very normal phenomena. So many petitions are lying before the Commission, where the system operators have brought to the Commission the instances of grid violations and huge frequency excursions. So even when the DSM was linked to frequency, there were instances. And also, sir, after we brought in the concept of sign change, that sustained deviation, again, sir, there were allegations that this also goes, this counters the frequency linkage and the management of the grid through EY, through frequency linked, because sometimes it acts in the opposite direction. So all these issues, I mean, so sir, I mean, we hardly had, over a period of time, we hardly had any such, these things were changing over the period. But at least, sir, some of the findings which we have articulated in the order issued by the Commission yesterday, are that the governor response, especially the primary response, which was expected of the generators, was not coming forth. The AGC also said there is a manual clipping, and the AGC support from many of the generators were not coming forth. Sir, we are heavily dependent on RRAs and on RRAs.
Because you heard the generators, because the range that you provided, operating range, 2%
Yes.
was too narrow.
So, sir, that's
Now
right, sir. So, sir, yeah, I appreciate, sir. So that's the point. So what was important is that 2% band was possibly too narrow, and that got increased, and that's one way of putting it. That 2% band is too narrow, which is not sufficient for me to give primary response or secondary response. So that need be corrected, and the commission did correct it in yesterday's order. And that's why I said that not that every change is perfect, 100% perfect. It needs refinement, and there is a constant effort at improving this whole issue. But the other thing is that, sir, we are too much dependent on the existing thermal generators to provide our tertiary reserves or RRAs. So we also have been sending messages for quite some time that you need to harness other resources to provide the ancillary services. Time has come when we need to nudge ourselves out of the normal comfort zone and try and make sure that in our meetings that we had with the regional power committees and with the other generators in the recent past, post which we firmed up and then came up with yesterday's order, revealed that some of the state generators or resources are willing to come and participate in the tertiary services, but then the necessary enablement through procedures has not happened. So we have highlighted that aspect as well in our order. So all these things need to be nudged. You cannot completely depend on only the existing sets of resources, and that to thermal resources to provide you the reserves in the system. So yes, sir, the way forward is for all stakeholders to participate in a positive fashion. Yes, linkage. Sir, as I said, we were in a comfort zone at one point, until the recent past, because there was a linkage to frequency and people were responding driven by the commercial incentives and disincentives. So any change that you bring about will have its own repercussions, and things are improving, sir. We have decided to constitute a committee, and we'll go into all these details to make sure that the reserves get created. So
Thank you, Shah. I think to conclude the discussions, I think it's not very clear to me that what was the need for bringing the change.
Sumi raised the hand.
Yeah, who wants to say? Any?
Sir, I just wanted to, yes, sir, I just wanted to supplement. Sir, all what has been said is correct, sir. We need everything. Everything what has been said has a grain of truth and must be done. But all these things will take time. Coming only to one specific philosophy where there is some thought has to be given. Expecting complete active control is one philosophy. Completely on passive control is another philosophy. But we need both active as well as passive. That is how India could improve. While we will work on resource adequacy, forecasting, reserves, tertiary, ancillary, bringing all the generators, all these things, action has to go. These are going also in the right direction. So we got RTM, we got everything. But being a federal structure, we also need to have passive control, and let that be there. Let that not normally work. Frequency should work so close to 50 that passive control will not be required. But if the situation demands, that feature should come into action. That is my limited submission, sir. So one more point, sir, just so that's the basic on the merits, sir. One more point, sir. I heard Honorable Minister saying a number of times, and that rings in my ears, certainty of punishment. Certainty of punishment is more important than the regulation. So at present, everybody goes scot-free. For last so many, almost a decade, we haven't seen any penalty on anyone, sir. So that is also something we have to think that how do we go. But sir, we need everything. Before removing something, let us have all other things in place, sir. Sir, State level, we have heard Mr. Mehta, who has been, very kind in not saying things the way you could have said. States, we need, Samast is there. Money has been provided by central. We need to implement, sir. Otherwise, only at the central level, giving powers to some load dispatch center will not work, sir. It's a union of state. The strength lies in the states. If they deviate, nothing can be done from this. Only at the central level is my humble submission. So this may be considered. Thank you.
We can say that we were not ready at this time for this drastic change in the DSM regulations. We didn't have the adequate liquidity of resources in the market, and the market was not adequate to meet the deviations. So can we now request Mr. Shahi to give his remarks?
I listened to all the speakers, including your introductory remarks. Suni made a number of points. Mr. Sushant made one that was there a provocation for making a change, because in the past that I listened to all the speakers and different points of views, including from the state level, and Rakesh made some points, good points. Suni made a number of points, and Sushant, on the basis of what has been done by the CERC, made his observations. One thing came out clearly, that was there really a convincing provocation for making a change? Because in the last few years, I think data indicates that you have done fairly well. I think more than 75% of the time, you have been in the desired range of frequency 49.9 to 50.05, and variations on either side, this way or that way, have been rather limited. So I think, did we have the need for doing it? And I think it was overstressed by both Rakesh and Mr. Suni, that if it was working well, why do we make the change? So that is one point. And then when we saw the chart, that just after this change was made in December, we had some issues. On the other hand, what the Commission seems to be saying, that there are developments, there are futures, we need to take into account those things. I would suggest that your future is going to be even tougher when we have larger amount of solar with variations, larger amount of wind power with variations. And there we will have to have sympathy with variations, because we can't predict that cloud will not be there suddenly, or we can't predict about the behavior of wind. So I think unpredictable behavior of our renewable sources of generation will also have to be taken into account. I agree that we cannot have the ideal situation of all the resources put in place. This we have been doing, whether it is voltage control related matter, whether generation control related matter. So I think we have to live with the situation. I mean, we can't expect too much of a very responsive approaches from the different state governments. Still, we have to do. We have regional load dispatch centers. We have our national load dispatch center. We have to do a good job, and we have done a good job. I think we should rethink about this, that some changes have been made. I mean, couple of changes have been made in last 1.5 months on the suggestion that was made, was circulated and notified by the Regulatory Commission. Perhaps if more changes are needed. One thing is very clear, that if you need to boost the frequency, definitely generator will have to be incentivized. And if somebody is over-consuming, he will have to be penalized. So that is a fundamental point. And therefore, we can't get away from that. I mean, I heard loud and clear, incentive and disincentive is not the total solution, as Sushanta said. I also agree with him that it is not the total solution. But the way we are functioning, our working just with the sense of responsibility, that type of behavior, if it came in the power sector, things would have been much better. I mean, different constituents, and particularly at the distribution end, with the sense of responsibility, people will function. If that problem was solved, nothing could have created any difficulty. But you can't expect that. We have to go by that. while we go on revolutionizing their thought process or making the changes in their mindset, it will take some more time. So therefore, incentive and disincentive is an important mechanism. If we are getting away from there, and that you used to do with UI earlier, and now you have the different formulations, but definitely generators who produce at above 50.05 frequency, they have to be careful. And consumers, if they consume, if the frequency is less and they don't do load setting, they have to be disincentivized. Similarly, I think we have to work on that basis. How perfect we make these formulations, that will go with the time. And as I said, that future is going to become more challenging because of uncertainties about some of the generation sources that we are. So let us prepare for those more uncertain situations. Let us also bring data analytic into our discussion or into our formulations, whether by our load dispatch centers or by our POSOCO or by CEA or any agency or by CERC, and try to understand the behavior, how more correctly we can predict what is going to happen. I think, according to me, past has been very good. Future, 4 or 5 years down the line, when we have larger ingress of the new sources of generation, behavior of supply will be a little more unpredictable. And therefore, there our penalty and other things will have to be taking into account that only things which are controllable and not controlled is penalized. If things are not controllable and definitely things are at the nature, then definitely you have a point to consider how much we penalize and how much we don't penalize. So I think I will go in the debate with the incentive and disincentive. At the same time, our regulations overseeing. It's not that the role of our system operator is not there. Nobody is saying that they will have to remain idle, but they will have to be very active, and they are very active. I think both the things will have to be harmonized. So we will send a brief note, Rakesh, from India Energy Forum to the Regulatory Commission that this is the view that was coming out, and one is not saying that they should not be dynamically evaluating and changing. Nobody is questioning that they should do or should not do. But one thing is coming very clear, that we do when it is badly needed. When it is working, let us give a trial and at the same time prepare for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. So hopefully the expert committee constituted by the CRC will look into all these aspects, and they will give an opportunity to all the stakeholders to give their presentation. And with those, I think CRC will definitely relook at the regulations. Thank you so much. Thank you. Mr. Bhamani.
Privileged to propose a vote of thanks to our honored panelists for having spared their time out of the busy schedule and educated. And there are so many points on which they have expressed their views. Mr. Chatterjee, Mr. Mehta, and Mr. Saxena. And we are also grateful and thanks to the participants who have shown great interest. As Mr. Sai said, if the present we have managed, the future we have to manage, because other sources of energy generation are going to come, and the role of state governments has to be more positive in accepting the recommendations. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we are honored with your presence, both panelists and the participants. And also, I would like to mention that Mr. Rakesh Nath, he had done his very hard work. He prepared a note in the advance so that the points are made clear and deliberated. We had very good response from the delegates, and they pushed their questions. I think this is a very unique type of webinar which India Energy Forum has organized. And nowadays, these issues are occupying the right position. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for